The Unwanted, Chapter 12. The truck bumped along for half an hour. When it stopped, Jimmy and I saw our new home for the first time. My aunt's house faced the dusty street from across a large garden. Built 20 years before, it had a red tile roof and white columns, an odd mix of Asian and European architecture. The windows were trimmed with green shutters opening outward, on which the paint was so old that it had cracked into thousands of tiny creases, showing the decayed wood within. Only a story high, the house contained 6 small rooms with white paint and faded red molding on every wall. The house had been built to shelter a few members of my aunt's family, but as the family grew, it had become too crowded. My uncle asked my mother for help so that he could build another flat behind the main house. Because of the eternal guilt my mother felt toward her sister for being so poor, she put up the money. The new bungalow, situated between the kitchen and the bathroom, provided 3 extra rooms. The 2 older girls, Moonlight and Snow, lived next to the kitchen, and the 3 eldest boys, Lay, Ten, and Nia, were settled in the 2 other rooms. On the left side of my aunt's house stood my new home. At first glance, it seemed impossibly small and primitive. It struck me that the entire place could fit into my mother's old garage and still leave plenty of room for a car. This house, too, was painted white, but it was newer than the others in the compound. At first sight, it looked like a gigantic matchbox, rectangular, covered with corrugated tin roof and without columns. Behind it, on the other side of the well, was my aunt's kitchen. My aunt, her husband, and all of their children ran out to greet us at the gates. Everybody smiled and exchanged greetings as they helped my grandparents carry their belongings inside. Not much furniture had escaped damage at the Wynn mansion, but my grandparents and my mother had packed as much as they could salvage. Among our reclaimed possessions, the last valuable piece was an ebony altar for my deceased uncle, hand-carved and weighing over 100 kilograms. When he was alive, my young uncle was the gem of the whole family, the only son of my grandparents' 14 children who lived past his 18th birthday. He had entered the Vietnamese Navy the day he turned 19. At 21, he drowned while swimming one morning at the base. The report of his death devastated my grandfather. Coincidentally, I was born across town on that very same day. My grandfather, torn between the bad news and the good news, had taken my birth as an omen, believing that his young son's spirit had returned via my mother's womb. I then became his favorite grandchild. The altar was given a prominent spot in the new house's living room, which was now being turned into my grandparents' bedroom, with their bed in one corner near the window and a sewing machine a few feet away. The next room contained 3 beds for Luan, Jimmy, and me. Next to my bed was an armoire, set against the wall and locked at all times. My mother kept the key. Our bedroom also contained a chest of drawers for clothes. The last room on the back of the house, about 90 square feet, had just enough room to hold a bed for my mother and Lum and her small makeup desk. While we were moving in, my aunt sat on top of a cardboard box, smoking a hand-rolled cigarette. Her legs in her black nylon pants swung restlessly as she watched my mother making Jimmy's bed from across the room. Some of her children sat beside her. Their dirty faces stared at us curiously. Clearing her throat, she asked my mother, "Is that all the stuff they allowed you to take with you? Did you lose the rest?" My mother nodded, and my aunt responded with a heavy sigh. "Everything?" She repeated her question. Again, my mother nodded. "Unbelievable," my aunt continued. "Oh, well, It's too bad you could have asked me to hold some things for you before you ran off, unannounced like your pants were on fire. But since you didn't, I hope you don't mind that I took some things from the house while you were away. Look at it this way. If I didn't, someone else would have. And why can't that be me, your own sister? I don't know what you were thinking, but I don't plan on giving any of it back to you. What things did you take? My mother asked her. Just stuff. She shrugged, mostly for the kids. I don't remember every single thing. Why? Did you find any of my jewelry? Of course not, my aunt snapped. I didn't even know if you hid any in the house. Don't accuse me of stealing your precious jewels unless you want me to start a war right here, right now. I'm not accusing you. I'm asking you politely. Well, don't even ask me politely. I didn't take your wealth to my house. If anything, I am now taking in your ill luck by living next door to you. My mother did not say anything more. The silence grew into an uncomfortable tension until my aunt spoke. More important, what are you going to do now? I don't know, just start from scratch, I guess. I'm afraid that you may have to find a more suitable plan, sister. You are not 21 anymore. Besides, no offense, but this time your half-breed children will definitely hold you back. My mother stopped in the middle of making Jimmy's bed and turned around to look at my aunt. She lowered her voice. Would you please modify your language if you're going to talk about my children? You let me do the worrying, since it is none of your concern. And please don't ever use that awful word again in front of the boys. Why not? My aunt insisted. If you don't teach your kids the facts of life, someday somebody will. And when that happens, the words would not be this sweet to their ears. What is a half-breed, Mommy? Jimmy asked. Before my mother could answer him, a cousin of mine spoke up. He was about 17 years old. Sweating from the heat, his face was red and covered with acne. A half-breed is a child, usually from the results from when a woman has slept with a foreigner. Like you, he said, facing Jimmy, as if he were challenging my brother to a duel. His eyes were crossed. The two irises stared angrily at each other across the bridge of his nose. Enough, my mother screamed. How could you just sit there letting your children talk to us this way? My aunt shrugged once again. Her eyes hid behind a cloud of smoke. I taught my children the freedom to speak their own mind. They aren't stupid, you know. She frowned. And look who should talk. You, their aunt, have always treated them like dirt. Frankly, I don't appreciate the tone of your voice. You can't talk to us like you still have money, sister. Times have changed. My mother resumed fixing the bed for my brother without saying another word. Listen, maybe you can stay mad at me since it is your nature, my aunt said, but I can't be mad at you. You are, after all, my only sister, so I welcome you to live here. I do want to be straight about one thing, though. You may think that you can choose to live your life whichever way you want. The truth is, it's not that easy anymore, not when we live side by side. What you do will reflect on my family by association. Ah, yes, something else you should consider. I'd like you to destroy anything that might link you to the past, because you never know what will come back to haunt you later. Of course, with something like these two big televisions here, she pointed at my brother and me, you can't hide them. But pictures and addresses can be very dangerous to keep around. The police come by night and search the whole block. Think about it. I leave you alone to unpack. Let's go home, children. She got up to throw her still burning cigarette out of the window, following it with a hefty spume of expectorates. Her children trailed after her as she left. Luan excused herself to go to the market to buy groceries, and my grandparents retired to their room. My mother lay down on Jimmy's bed as if exhausted. Looking fresh and relaxed after a long bath, Lum walked in. His beard was shaven and his skin was clean. Throwing his soiled clothes in a corner and still wrapped in a wet towel, He sank to his hands and knees and crawled toward my mother, smiling. She sat up from the bed, looking tense. "Please forgive me. I'm begging you," he said. He reached out for her foot and pressed his lips against her skin. Like a wildcat, my mother jumped up and kicked Lum in his face. He fell backward and landed on his elbows. Slowly, Lum got up, adjusting his towel, while my mother returned to her seat on my brother's bed. His hands folded into a fist as he spat some blood on the floor. "Stupid horse," he said. "I would hit you so hard if you weren't big with child." My mother stood up and arched her back, pulling her blouse up to show her round abdomen. "Want to strike me?" she shrieked. "Go right ahead. Hit me right here. Help me get rid of your stinking mess." He pointed his finger at her. "I don't need you, but my name was in the registration, and so I'm going to stay here whether you want me to or not. I suggest that you should wise up and learn to live with me, woman." He walked outside, kicking a chair that blocked his path. That night, after my mother locked herself in her bedroom, he crawled into Luan's bed. From where I lay in the dark, I could hear her quiet struggle as she tried to push him away. After a period of heavy breathing, they exchanged words. I heard Lum's voice rising with rage. "You did what? I can't believe it. Was that the old hen's idea?" There was more silence. Then he continued. However, his voice was much lower this time, full of regret. "How could you get rid of my baby?" he asked. "Get off me," Luan spoke in a whisper. "It was not the mistress's decision. It may have been her suggestion, but the choice was mine. I did it for me, so that I can be free from you." The sound of a slap exploded in the dark. Soon after, I heard Luan jump out of her bed, and her voice penetrated the night. "Hit me again, and I'll report you to the authorities. Follow me to my bed one more time, and I swear to the gods I will search for the most painful way to murder you." Her footsteps pounded toward my bed. I could feel the mosquito net above me being swept away, and soon her warm body slid next to me. Holding me in her trembling embrace, she cried softly in the dark. Back in her bed, Lum lay quiet through the rest of the night. When I got up the next day, Luan had already left for the market, alone. She did not return for dinner. My mother and Lum avoided one another like the plague. Staying in Luan's bed for most of the day, Lum snuggled under the sheet, reading a kung fu novel. My mother stayed inside her room to arrange her nail polish collection. Jimmy and I ventured outside and saw our cousins playing in the dirt. At first, the boys pretended to ignore us, but it was not long before they ran over to touch us with the same astonishment that they would show to a pair of rare Christmas ornaments.